They called her the Lost One. That's what the report said when the rescue team first returned. An MIA notation scribbled beside her name like an afterthought, a line destined to fade into another military archive no one would ever read. But 2 months later, a weathered sat phone pinged from deep inside the desert. The voice on the other end? Calm, precise, controlled, target neutralized, area secure. And when the drone feed finally locked on, they saw her, Lieutenant Sarah Callan, 27, walking barefoot through the storm, the enemy compound burning behind her. If you believe courage doesn't vanish when the world thinks you're beaten, make sure to like and subscribe, because what Sarah endured and how she answered changed everything they thought they knew about survival. It started 72 hours before that call, when her unit, SEAL Recon Delta 9, was running low and silent through the wastelands of southern Khorasan, a mission so classified even their extraction coordinates were handwritten, not transmitted. The sandstorm had come without warning, a wall of chaos that swallowed sky and sound. One wrong move separated Sarah from her team, and by nightfall, she was alone. No comms, no flares, no hope of regrouping. But that wasn't the real danger. The real danger came when the flashlights found her, 5 beams cutting through the darkness, shouting in a language she half understood. She fought. Of course she did. Took one down, maybe 2, before the rifle but cracked across her temple and the world went black. When she woke, her wrists were bound behind her, her boots gone, her uniform torn, dragged across wet ground as her captors laughed and jeered, calling her little ghost because she wouldn't speak. They didn't know ghosts are what soldiers become when they've already died once and come back with purpose. In the dirt, Sarah counted steps, memorized accents, cataloged every weakness while pretending to be broken. They paraded her through the mud, shouting for cameras, shoving her down when she tried to stand, but she only stared, not at them, but at the horizon, the same way she'd stared down storms in training, waiting for the shift, the moment when chaos tilts in your favor. They mistook her silence for surrender. She was studying, watching how the guards rotated, how one's hand trembled when lighting a cigarette, how the leader always kept his radio on his left shoulder. Small, human patterns that would later become her map to freedom. That night, rain came hard, drenching everything. In their arrogance, they left her tied near the supply tent, assuming she'd freeze before she'd flee. But Sarah Callan had survived BUD/S, hypothermia drills in Pacific surf that made this rain feel like mercy. She rolled to her side, pressed the sharp edge of a discarded ration tin against the rope, sawing until her wrists bled and the fibers split. Every drop of blood was a promise. When she finally slipped free, she didn't run. She crawled, low, deliberate, through the mud they'd dragged her through hours earlier, reclaiming every inch they'd stolen. She reached the weapons cache first, found what she needed. 1 knife, 1 canteen, 1 radio. She tuned the frequency by memory, the same channel she and her team had used to signal extraction. Static answered. Then, faintly, her own pre-recorded distress beacon pinged back, meaning her team had left a marker somewhere close. Hold on, she whispered to herself. You're not gone yet. The next day, the camp stirred under gray light. One of her captors, the young one with the cigarette, went missing. Then another. The leader shouted orders, furious, thinking rival factions were closing in. He didn't know Sarah had already turned his own perimeter sensors against him, had used the storm's echo to mask her movements. By sundown, their laughter was gone, replaced by the sound of panic, gunfire into shadows, screams into the wind. Sarah moved like a phantom, her body bruised, her breath steady, her eyes calm. Every takedown was surgical, quiet, almost merciful. She didn't kill out of rage. She neutralized. Precision over passion, the way she'd been trained. When the compound finally erupted in flames, she stood in the rain again, coated in the same mud they'd dragged her through. But this time, she was the one walking. Each step forward was a reclamation, of identity, of honor, of everything they tried to strip away. She keyed the radio, sent the coordinates, then watched the horizon blaze. Hours later, when the drone found her, she didn't raise her hands or ask for help. She just looked up and said, "Tell them I'm coming home." In the debrief room days later, an officer asked her how she'd survived. She answered quietly, They mistook endurance for weakness. And that was the truth. They'd thought they broke her by dragging her through the mud. But all they did was teach her how to move through it faster. Sarah Callan didn't escape that night. She ascended, rose from the earth itself like a reminder that no matter how deep you bury strength, it finds its way back to light. So remember her name, because when they dragged her through the mud, they didn't bury her. They built the storm that buried them. By the time the storm cleared, the world believed Sarah Callan was either dead or captured beyond recovery, but the world didn't know Sarah. The footage from the compound, the propaganda video they tried to record, never aired because she never gave them the chance to finish it. At 0200, when the first lightning strike split the horizon, Sarah moved. She had hidden in plain sight for hours, pretending to be unconscious, waiting for the precise moment when the camp's generator flickered and the guard's attention turned skyward. Her wrists were raw from rope burns, her head still bleeding from the blow, but her mind was steady, calculating. She remembered her instructor's words from training. Fear sharpens. Ping clarifies. Use both. And she did. She used everything. The rhythm of the rain, the pattern of boots in the mud, even her own exhaustion, to turn captivity into cover. Her first strike wasn't loud. She slipped behind the smaller tent where a guard had left his weapon propped against a crate, loosened the knife from its sheath, and waited until his shadow fell across her. One quick move, a silent pull, and he was down before his breath could form a warning. She dragged him into the mud, took his earpiece, and began listening. The radio chatter was chaotic. Too many voices, too little control. Perfect. She crept through the maze of crates and canvas, cutting through ropes, shorting out lights, turning their own setup into confusion. For every step she took, thunder answered, covering her movement like an ally. The men who once mocked her now shouted her name in panic, not mockery. Somewhere deep inside, she felt the ache of fear twist, but not for herself. For the ones who'd come after, who'd think captivity meant defeat. No, not tonight. She was going to rewrite that story. When she reached the comms tent, 2 guards remained inside. They were arguing about whether to move her to another camp. She used their voices as cover, rolled beneath the flap, and cut the line to their power cell before either could turn. The room went dark. Her knife flashed once, twice, then silence. She took one of their rifles, but didn't fire. It wasn't that kind of mission. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about message, precision, balance. She moved to the outer perimeter next, tracing the muddy ground until she found the drainage culvert she had memorized earlier. There, tucked between the rocks, was the old transponder her team had dropped before the storm, half buried, damaged, but not dead. She rerouted its wire with scavenged copper from the radio tent, repurposing it as a trigger for the camp's emergency flares. When the next patrol walked past, she let them. She wanted witnesses. She wanted them to see the flares ignite one by one, circling the camp like eyes opening in the dark. Panic spread faster than fire. Men screamed orders, thinking airstrikes were inbound. They fired wildly into the storm, bullets slicing through empty rain. Sarah crouched low, waiting until the confusion hit its peak, then detonated the vehicle depot using their own stored fuel. The blast rolled through the camp like thunder given shape, lighting up every terrified face with the realization that they were no longer hunters. They were prey. When the noise faded, only smoke and wind remained. Sarah moved through it like a shadow given purpose, her face streaked with mud and blood, but her expression unreadable. One man dropped his weapon and begged in a language she couldn't fully understand, and she simply gestured for him to leave. He did. The rest she bound, using the same cords that had held her hours earlier. She worked methodically, her movements almost ritualistic, tying each knot the way she'd been tied, a reversal of power made quiet. When she was done, she stood in the center of the camp, surrounded by silence, the firelight glinting off the wet edges of the knife she no longer needed. For a long moment, she just breathed. The wind shifted, and for the first time since her capture, she looked up and saw the stars again. She keyed the broken transponder and transmitted the simplest message possible. Area secure. Send retrieval. Then she waited, not like a victim rescued, but like a sentinel keeping watch. Hours passed. The rain slowed. Dawn crept across the horizon in shades of gold and ash. When the rescue chopper finally descended, its blades scattering debris across the smoldering camp. The crew expected to find a prisoner. Instead, they found her standing barefoot in the mud, uniform torn, hands steady at her sides. The medics rushed forward, shouting for her to sit, to rest, to let them help, but she just turned toward the wreckage and said, "Make sure they see it." They didn't understand then, but they would. The footage captured from the drone above showed the full scene: the camp destroyed, her captors bound, and the American flag she had reattached to a broken antenna fluttering through the smoke. Later, in debriefing, they asked what she'd done to survive, how she'd dismantled an entire compound with no backup, no weapons, and no hope of extraction. She gave no grand speech. She just looked at the officer across the table and said, "They dragged me through the mud. I learned how to breathe in it." Her words hung in the room long after she left. Outside, soldiers who hadn't known her name now whispered it with quiet awe. Lieutenant Sarah Callan, the ghost of Corzin, the one who vanished in the storm and walked out carrying the weight of her flag. She didn't talk about revenge, and she didn't talk about fear. She talked about staying alive long enough to make sure her silence meant something. And in that silence, somewhere between lightning and dawn, a legend was born. Weeks later, when Sarah Callan finally stepped onto American soil again, the world barely noticed. Her return wasn't televised. Her mission still buried under redacted reports and sealed folders marked classified, no public release. She didn't care. She'd had her fill of noise. For the first time in months, she felt rain without fear, saw light that wasn't fire, breathed air not choked with dust. But peace didn't come easily. Every night she dreamed of the storm, the laughter, the mud, the smell of diesel smoke, and every morning she woke before dawn, lacing her boots like she still had somewhere to be. Her body healed fast. Her mind, slower. The doctors said she should talk to someone. She said she already had. Herself, out there, in the dark, and she'd said everything that needed saying. What she didn't expect was the ripple her story left behind. One by one, her team members started to hear whispers filtering through the ranks. Unofficial debriefs, secondhand accounts, drone footage that somehow escaped deletion. The story of a lone SEAL who turned captivity into command. Commanders called it an anomaly. The enlisted called it something else, the reckoning. Within weeks, recruits at Coronado began repeating her name during drown-proofing drills, like a prayer for endurance. Callan grit, they called it. A quiet resilience that refused to die, no matter how deep the mud got. Her superiors summoned her to D.C. once, a closed session in a cold room lined with flags. A general with medals heavy enough to bend his posture asked her what she wanted: promotion, decoration, reassignment. She said none of it. "I want the names of the girls you'll send next," she told him calmly. "I'll train them myself." And she did. She rewrote the escape and evasion manual, stripped out the guesswork, replaced it with instinct and empathy. Survival isn't about being the strongest, she told her trainees. It's about remembering who you are when the world calls you prey. Every class ended the same way, with Sarah walking barefoot across the training pit, mud caked to her calves, looking each recruit in the eye and saying, "If they drag you through it, stand up taller. It's not meant to bury you. It's meant to remind you what you can rise from." Months later, during a Pentagon review ceremony, someone leaked part of her helmet cam footage. Just 10 seconds, grainy, rain-slicked, but unforgettable. It showed Sarah emerging from the destroyed camp, lightning framing her silhouette, her flag patch stitched back onto her sleeve with thread torn from her own uniform. The clip spread across military forums, veteran networks, even mainstream feeds under the caption, "She walked out of the storm." Thousands commented, soldiers and civilians alike. She didn't fight for glory. She fought to exist. That's what a SEAL looks like. Strength in silence. Sarah never replied to any of them, but she read every word. On the anniversary of her rescue, she returned quietly to her base in Corzin, now abandoned and reclaimed by sand. She found the burnt remains of the compound she had dismantled, now silent except for the wind. She knelt in the same mud that once bound her and placed something small there, her original knife, the same one she'd used to cut through her restraints. "For whoever comes next," she whispered, "leave stronger than you arrived." Then she stood, saluted the horizon, and walked away. Years would pass. Her name would fade from headlines, but never from the stories whispered among soldiers before deployment. Recruits still touched the training pit's wall, marked with 5 words painted in faded stencil letters. They dragged her through mud. And beneath it, in Sarah's handwriting, smaller, but sharper, she became the storm. Because legends don't always roar. Sometimes they whisper, breathe, endure, and when the world tries to bury them, they rise through the dirt, unbroken, unstoppable, and unforgettable.